Yeah, but some of them are. A couple of them are. You're from.
Okay.
And that's just sort of like.
What do you want to, when you want us, do you want us to sing?
Keep singing. How about if you want to say something, say something. Okay.
Oh, we're good.
All right, it's time. So we're just warming up here a little bit. We just want to welcome everybody. Thank you for coming. My name's my name is Tyler LaPlante. I'm the Vice Chair of the Sioux Tribe Unit 5 Director. My traditional name is Eagle Feather. I was born in the Sioux, Powhatan, raised here in Marquette, where it's been home ever since. Anyway, you know, we have a special guest here going to give us a little bit of a teaching and some history about our own communities that lived here forever. And we just want to say that everybody's welcome to attend. You can invite friends, family. We brought tons of food for you guys to snack on in between. Don't be shy, help yourself. Most of it's healthy, but I brought cookies. So yeah, and don't be afraid to ask us any questions. You know, when it's all said and done, or when we have time to linger. And I'm going to pass it over to TJ here to explain the welcome. Oh, Judd. Oh, sorry, Judd. Pass it to Judd.
You go. Oh, I go. Hörni, Mavashkiming and Disney House Mang and Doran Wayne and going it out. Hey, my name is TJ. I'm just gonna introduce the drum a little bit. We're grateful to be here and to get invited to start the presentation. And a lot of times, kind of like traditionally, what we do is to bring the drum in, because the drum is supposed to bring us all together, and that's kind of what we do. And that's our goal. This drum this grandpa that we got with us today is Morning Thunder. It's Northern Michigan University's the drum that stays at Northern Michigan University. And Judd, how do you say your last name? Sojourn? Yeah, all right. Judd Sojourn, the drum stays with him, and he kind of takes care of it and does his thing. But we always like to come and we'll just do a couple warm-up songs or whatever, but we'll do a regular welcome song. So we always like to do this one when people are coming together for something. So you don't have to stand or nothing, and you can let your mind go free. You don't have to be all formal.
What?
Okay, so we listen to elders when they tell us to do something. Some of the boys that sit around here are elders, but they still listen to when our female elders tell us what to do. So, yeah.
Do you mind if we take a video?
Oh, yeah, that's fine.
Is that okay?
Yeah, yeah.
All right, I just wanted to be sure.
Yeah, sorry about that. But so Rose asked us to do another song, so we gotta do it. But we're gonna do a flag song. So the flag song to us is kind of akin to like the national anthem. So it's our way of paying respects to if there's Eagle staffs here, or the flags and things like that. So it is another song. So if you can and you're willing to, you can stand up for this one, please. Oh yeah, hats. Yeah, that's right.
Remove your hats, please.
Remove your hat. If you notice, I have an eagle feather on my hat, and I am also a veteran. I have considered a warrior within the nation. Therefore, just like us, when we're out on the fields and stuff, if we're under uniform, we'll salute the flag. And that's appropriate for the veterans. They do not have to remove their hats.
Yeah. Thank you all for coming tonight. My name is Rosemary, and I'm one of the elders that's on the elder board. We'd like to welcome Jim Paquette from Negaunee, who is a local historian and archaeologist, and also Metis native, right? Correct? So welcome, Jim. Thank you.
Oh. Say a few things.
Oh, you have to say something.
I have to say something, yeah. So, we're going to bring the screen down, and it's going to come from right about here. So, we might have to move some of the chairs. So. I know you didn't come to see me, but I'm Marty, and I'm the Adult Programming Coordinator here at Peter White. And I want to thank Rose, actually, because she's the one that approached me to do this here, and I was so excited to be able to collaborate with Sault Ste. Marie Tribe Unit 5 to bring this here and to bring Jim to the stage to talk about this. I'm just going to let you know that there's lots of great things coming up at the library in this coming week. Tomorrow we have our global cinema, which is a Chinese film called Farewell, My Concubine. And then the Great Lakes Poetry Festival kicks off on Sunday. We have lots of great events coming up, but one of the events that I'm really excited about is Thursday night. We're going to have an Indigenous Poetry Night, where we're going to have Indigenous authors and poets here to and virtually. We got Tyler Detloff coming from the Sioux. He couldn't make it here today, next Thursday, because his wife is going to give birth to a baby in a few days, and he was like, I don't think I should come to Marquette. But we're going to have him here virtually. And we're also going to honor the memories of a couple of other Indigenous poets who passed recently, Sally Brunk and Rosalie Petrosky. So really great events next week here at Peter White Public Library. Please pick up some brochures back there if you are interested. And also, there's lots and lots of food, so don't be shy about going and grabbing food, all right? But I'm going to turn things over to Jim here. I think we're almost ready. And we're going to bring down the screen, and I can't wait to hear this. So thank you, Jim.
Thank you. Big wish. I talk pretty loud, but I'll use this anyway. Aha. Yeah, let's see here. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Gotta admit. Okay, first of all, I want to say miigwech for having me here tonight. You don't know what an honor it is for me to be here tonight to share knowledge about our ancestors. The greatest gift that we can share with anyone is knowledge. And the gift was given to me by our ancestors, but it was given to me so I could share it with others. And that's what I'm going to do here tonight. And so with that, the presentation is called exactly what it is. It's Gifts from Our Past. And it's uncovering the story of the people who once lived at the Goose Lake Outlet Number 3 site. The Goose Lake Outlet Number 3 site, a lot of times when we think of archaeological sites or, prehistoric or early historic and prehistoric sites, you think of something big and huge. This is not that. This is something that's very small. It is an early northern Anishinaabe winter hunting encampment site. And what makes it so special, a couple things. First of all, it dates back to sometime during the 1620s and the 1630s. There's probably people living there before the Mayflower landed, over where it landed at Plymouth Rock. But there were French people here living in North America, and they were trading with the Anishinaabe and other people that were in the Great Lakes region at that time. What makes it so important, and I say important from an archaeological standpoint and a cultural standpoint, it's known as one of the most important archaeological sites right now in the entire Great Lakes region because of what it represents and because of that early date that we've been able to date it at. In fact, it's the earliest archaeological evidence in the entire Great Lakes region of an ancestral Ojibwa occupation. Okay, so that makes it really important. Now, where it is, it's just sitting a few miles from here. It's just inland on just south of Goose Lake on the outlet area. And you can see from this map here as to where it is located. The story of the discovery, I could go back, we could be here for days, and I could tell you, leading into what led me to this day here, because I've been doing this my entire life, trying to figure out more so who I am as a Native person, as a Métis Anishinaabe person. Oops, that jumped ahead there. But the story of this particular site, the discovery of this site, I'll start here, just for the sake of time. But it was back in the late 80s, 1988, in fact, that I was employed by Northern Michigan University. I was a lab research assistant for their archaeologist, Dr. Marla Buckmaster. And at the time, we were working on an archaeological project that was on Goose Lake. And that's Goose Lake, if you don't know where that is, that's just east of Negaunee. It's actually pretty close to here. At the time, one of the things we're trying to do was trying to figure out was there was a lot of early prehistoric things there, but there was the remains of historic structures that were there, and we're trying to figure out, well, what exactly were there? What were they? Because no one really I never heard of anybody ever living there on the end of the lake. And so my job was to try to research that and try to figure it out. And what I did was I got my hands on what they call the trig maps. And this is a copy of the trig map that I had in my hand back in 1988. And what the trig maps show is information that was recorded by William Austin Burt and Douglas Houghton when they first surveyed the Upper Peninsula, in the central Upper Peninsula, back in the mid-1840s. And, of course, they were told to put a lot of things on it. Whenever in their notes, they surveyed, of course, the township lines. But if they came across village sites, if they came across burial grounds, if they came across, things like that, anything that was cultural, they would put on a map and they would put notes. Now, the trig historical maps are actually printed in Ely, Minnesota. And the guy's name was William Trigg, and he's since passed away. But he was hired by the tribes, by the Ojibwa tribes here in the Upper Peninsula and in Minnesota and in northern Wisconsin to try to figure out what was here before the white man came, okay? And, of course, these maps here were, when you get back into the 1840s, it's pretty much it. And this was when people were going after their treaty rights. And so it was from a legal standpoint that these trig maps were put together. And anybody can get these maps, and if you want to see some incredible things, just Google it. And they're not expensive at all, and you can get copies of these trig maps. They're just amazing. But one of the things that they showed on the trig map, on these trig maps, things that Burton and Houghton had put in, was this a trail that comes from, it actually came from here, came from Marquette, from the bay here, from both the Carp River and the Chocolate River. It went inland over towards where the Crossroads Bar is, went up on top of the hill onto the Sands Plains. Part of it headed directly to Goose Lake, and the other part of it went all the way down to Badenoch. And it was the main overland trail system that people from here going overland that they would travel to get from Lake Superior to Lake Michigan. And on the trig maps he wrote on there, this is how Burton Houghton had described it. It says, Indian Trail from the Chocolate River to the Esconobie River, okay? And that's in 1840s language there. And what I noticed was that that trail hit the Goose Lake outlet just south of the area where we were working on the other project. And so I immediately, I thought, oh my God, look at this. So I went to that area. And of course, that's what it looked like back in 1988. There was nothing had happened there. It was all just trees and forest growth and so on and so forth. But I went back and I told Buckmaster about it, and I said, at some point, somebody needs to really go over there and investigate that area because it's a sweet spot. You got to see it to believe it. And of course, that never happened. Nobody ever went there. That is in terms of archaeology, but the logging companies saw fit to go there. And what they did was, back around 1990, 91, the logging companies came in, and they really just, they went in, they took the trees down, and of course, when they did that, they built log landings and everything else. So they really disturbed the whole area, okay? Now, Randy Champion, who was a good friend of mine back at that time, he just happened to be in that area, and he walked through it right after they logged it. And he immediately noticed that there was numerous artifacts laying on the surface that they had pushed up. So Randy got a hold of me, and we both went back out to the site, and we just walked and just surface collected things that they had pushed up, from disturbed context. And this is some of the things that we found. We found copper, we found some of the stone tools. And one of the unusual things, there was a lot of animal bone. Pieces of animal bone were strewn about. And usually here in the UP, you don't ever find that because the soils are real acidic. Bone disappears really quick, here in the UP. But for some reason, there was something in the soils out there that really that preserved the animal bone. And so what I did was, and the thing was, it was located exactly where on that Burt map where he said it would be. Exactly where that trail hit the outlet. And back then, by the way, the outlet wasn't called the Goose Lake Outlet. It was called the Escanaba River. Okay, if you look on the early maps, it says Escanaba River, not Goose Lake Outlet. And so it was right there. It was on a map, this trail that went from here to right there. And so what I did was, what I always do is that I sent down the official site documentation down to Lansing. Dr. John Halsey was a state archaeologist at the time. And so I sent him all of the information that I could gather on that particular site, including, any documentation that I had. And at the time, the things, if you look at these particular, if you think of those two there as arrowheads, those are projectile points, we would call them that. But those are the types of projectile points that people were using around 2,000 years ago. And that would be during what we call the woodland period. And so originally, the site, I described it as a woodland period site. Now, shortly thereafter, things started to grow up at the site. After the logging had occurred, and pretty soon the trees started to grow, and the grass was growing, and all the poison ivy was growing back that was there. I decided that one night, and just because it was a nice night, there was no other reason for it, I can tell you that, I left Negaunee where I live, and I drove out to the Goose Lake boat landing, and I grabbed my metal detector. I thought, I'm just going to walk down the outlet. I'm going to walk through the woods just because it's nice out. And I did that. And as I walked, I was scanning, and the only thing I was finding was some brass shell casings, which are everywhere out there. They're out there by the millions. And so, but when I got down, I walked a lot farther than what I had originally intended. And I was walking down that two-rut road that you can see me walking on my metal detector there. And I thought, well, this is far enough. I'm going to spin around. And when I was going to turn around, there was a place there where the loggers had pushed aside for a log landing area. They had taken their skidder and they had pushed the surface up. And I noticed what you see laying there. And a lot of people might think those are just rocks. Those aren't just rocks. I noticed it right away as a hearth. Those are what you called fire-cracked rocks. Those are rocks that somebody had used to cook something. And so I immediately went over to it, and I was standing there, and I thought, oh my gosh, look at this. They pushed up a fire pit. And I didn't really know how old it was. It could be anywhere from 5,000 years old to 100 years old. You don't really know, but that's what the rock looks like. It's usually granite and quartzites, those sort of harder rocks. And so you can see here in the picture here where those rocks are right below that first picture on that side. And that's where that hearth concentration was. And I just walked off to the side of it, and I was spinning my detector, and it went off, and it's got a digital readout, and it's got some other things on it. It's real high tech, and it was telling me it was a brass shell casing. And I thought, oh, not another brass shell casing. And I almost didn't dig it because I got tired of digging brass shell casings. But I dropped down anyway, just on an impulse, and I put just a small divot in the ground, and I popped it up. And up pops that Jesuit ring that you see over there, a 300-year-old ring. Now, when I first looked at it, I'd never held one in my hands before. I never actually saw one other than in the literature. And I was sort of holding it upside down, and I'll tell you, it's funny. I was looking at it, and I thought, oh, my God, it's a Chinese ring. It's written in Chinese. And what it is, it's IHS with a cross across the, it's a religious symbol. Then I rubbed it off, and I looked at it and said, oh, my gosh, it's IHS. That's what a Jesuit ring. And so I thought, okay, I got to get off this site. And so I thought, okay, there's something here. And I started walking towards the road, and I only got a matter of just maybe not even 10 feet. My metal detector rang off again, and I thought, okay, it's telling me brass shell casings. And I'm thinking, I don't know, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Went down, those other three rings were laying right together, and they were just under the surface. When I popped it up, all of them three rings just popped up. You could have heard me scream all the way back to Negaunee. Okay, because I'll tell you what, you go out there, you spend most of the time finding absolutely nothing. And when you see something like that, you let out a war whoop. And what I did was I got home. Now, this is a funny story, and I only got so much time, but I've got to tell this story. When I got home, I ran into the house, and my wife right here, Karen, and she was there with a couple of my daughters. And one of my daughters, Jody, who was kind of a little smarty pants, she was there, and I come running into the house. I said, you ain't going to believe it. I found Jesuit rings. You ain't going to believe it. And she's going, what are those, Dad? I said, well, they're rings. These are really, really, really old, And she goes, well, what does it say? I said, it says IHS. And she goes, Dad, that's Ishpeming High School. I said, Jody, shut up. That's the true story. Anyway, it gets better. So anyway, I got to move on. I forgot about that story till I was just up here right now. But anyway, there it was. Now, these are called, today they call them iconographic rings. Back then when I found them, wasn't that long ago, they called them Jesuit rings. And the reason they call them Jesuit rings, because these Jesuit rings were early historic artifacts, and they were scholars that associated them with the 17th century French Jesuit missionaries who came here into the into North America, into the upper Great Lakes region. But these rings were really actually something that were used also as just gifts and as for exchange by the early explorers and by the fur traders. And actually later on, rings, these brass rings, not these particular style, but brass rings become a very common gift item, that people wanted here in the Upper Peninsula, in the Great Lakes region. Of course, again, I fired off all the new information down to Halsey, down in Lansing, to let him know what we had found and where we had found it. And so that was sort of a big thing. And of course, the discovery of those rings, just those rings, it really made local and regional news. Now, I got to tell you, we totally protected the site's location. We never even referred to it. If we would refer to it as GLO number 3. Never called it Goose Lake Outlet, because we didn't want anybody going anywhere near that site, because we know there would be people that would go in there and they would ruin things. They would go in there and pillage the site, thinking that they were going to find things. Now, the questions that I had and others had at the time was, well, how did these early French trinkets that are 300 years old, how did they get to this site right here in Marquette County? How did they get here in the first place? Where did they come from, and who did they belong to? Who did they belong to? Why were 4 mid-17th century finger rings left at this site by Goose Lake? And then you start thinking things like, well, were they lost, or did something tragic happen to the people? And then the thing that you always think of is, well, how exactly old are these particular rings? And at the time, we really didn't know. So in 1999, I convinced Marla Buckmaster from Northern to expand our work in that area. And what we decided was in 1999, we began our 24-year on-site excavation project at this site. And the plan then was what they call phase 2 excavations. And all it is you're just going to go there and see if anything's in the ground. And so we went and in 1999 and in 2000, and we ended up putting in just 2 1-meter by 2-meter units, right side by side. And really what we did is we just dug down, carefully screened it out and screened everything just to see if anything was there, because chances are there was going to be nothing there. Well, were we surprised? X marked the spot. First of all, it was filled with animal bone, crushed animal bone, and lots of it. And you can see right here, that's the leg joint off of a moose. It was full of moose teeth, which was, I'm thinking, moose teeth? Where the heck did those come from? One of the moose fragments, or moose bone fragments, had what we call, and this is a part of a leg bone off of a moose, and it has what you call a high impact chop scar. Okay, and that's an obvious butching mark that somebody had. Whoever was there had an iron axe. Okay, had an iron French trade axe, and when they were busting that bone up, they smacked it with that axe. So that gives you evidence. The other early French trade items that we found in just those 2 units, we found the very tip of an iron butcher knife, and of course, iron knives were super popular for trade items right from the beginning, right till today. We still use them. And one of the things that we found that was really unusual, you can see here some of the busted up bone laying next to it there, was a pair of iron scissors. And you might be thinking that, well, that's really kind of weird, that's kind of rare. But if you go back and you look at the early trade manifests, iron scissors was one of the most popular trade items that the Ojibwa people and other people wanted. One of the reasons was because another very popular trade item was cloth. And they were going to make cloth, and in order to make their own clothes out of the cloth, they had to have thimbles, needles, and they had to have scissors. And so you'll see scissors show up a lot, and you might, like I say, you might think, well, that's really kind of rare, but it's actually pretty common. Another thing that we found was just a couple fragments of brass kettles. And actually, one piece was a piece of sheet copper fragment, which came from a copper kettle, and the other one was a piece of brass that came from a brass kettle. And it would be very common for Native peoples throughout North America. These brass kettles that they got from the French and from the English and from the Dutch, they were pretty cheap items. They were super thin. And so they would wear holes in them. But one of the other things was they were really nice, bright, and shiny. And so what a lot of the people did was they just basically cut those kettles up. They made jewelry out of them. They made projectile points. They made knives. They made scrapers. They made any number of things out of. And so it's very common on these early trade sites, fur trade sites, to find just fragments of those copper kettles. And then we found something that was just incredibly beautiful, and it was only one small little tiny little bead. But it's a robin's egg blue. It's an oval glass trade bead, okay? And that thing is just, it's incredible. Now, we're going to come back to that in a minute here. Now, we knew just based on that, just based on those few items, that we had discovered something extremely rare. It was an inland indigenous hunting encampment site that probably dated to sometime in the 17th century, back into the 1600s, and that's what we were thinking back at that time. Nobody had ever found one before. And I want you to think about this. How many thousands of these must be out there? And nobody had ever located one and had ever excavated a family's winter encampment anywhere here in the Great Lakes. It's crazy that nobody's ever found one before. Well, anyway, we knew that whoever it was who once lived at Goose Lake, at the site, they had either made contact with other people who had access to these French European trade items, or it could have been direct face-to-face contact. And that's exciting, with early French traders and explorers or missionaries. And so what I found out then was, I needed to educate myself, about this pivotal time period. I didn't know anything about the 17th century time period as a historian and as an archaeologist. And that was such an important time in our history here, because that's when two very different people, the French and the indigenous people, the Ojibwa people that lived here, first came into contact. And they first met each other, and they actually really hit it off well. One of the things that what I was doing prior to that, for years and years, my line of study was what they call Paleo-Indian archaeology. My line of study was to prove that we as a people have been here since the end of the last ice age. And what I was able to do was to prove that people have been living here since the ice melted some 13,000 years ago, okay? And so my field of study was where you see the blue line over there, in that particular time period, where people up here were using these big stone spear points to hunt caribou, okay? All of a sudden, shoot that line forward 10,000 years, and that's all of a sudden, that's the site I was working on. And I knew little to nothing about it, so I had to educate myself on that particular time period. But I also decided that, which I always did, was that whenever you find something, what you have to do is you need to learn from that particular thing that you found, but then you need to share the knowledge. And that's why you were given that gift from the person who had left it there, okay? So I knew that that my responsibility was to learn from it and also to educate and to share that knowledge, which is what I'm doing here tonight. And back then I started doing public talks right away, letting people know that we had found these things right here in Marquette County. Now, another thing that happened to me that was great was, because I was getting some publicity there for what I was doing, and my yapping mouth like I'm doing tonight here, just a woman named Dr. Carol Mason, very, very well-known famous archaeologist who, in her expertise, was in this field, okay? In fact, she had written numerous papers on Jesuit rings. She's the person who really figured them out. And she lived down in Wisconsin, down Appleton, Wisconsin. And she got a hold of me, and she wanted to know if I would co-author an article with her on the Wisconsin archaeologist on the rings. And I said, oh, yeah, sure, And so we did. And it really was a turning point, because what we were able to do, and I should say what she was able to do, and I just tagged along as her co-author, I'll give her all the credit in the world, was that we figured out that the style of engraving on these particular rings belongs at the earliest part of the ring sequence. They represent the earliest known rings from Europe into New France, into North America. They're hand-engraved plaques, and they got ridge bands. They're very. It's a very specific design. And so what we knew was that the date range of these rings that were found right here, and thus the site itself, dated to sometime between 1630 and 1660, because that's when those rings were being distributed. Now, that was amazing. Again, Once again, amazing. And that pushed it back from the early fur trade historic era into what we call proto-historic, okay? Now, proto-historic, and I'll read this because this is a good definition here by Ron Mason. It says, the time during which the first European artifacts or materials appear in a given region, but before Europeans arrived themselves in any significant numbers and began to record something of their observations. And of course, here in Michigan and in the western Great Lakes region, this is that very mysterious time period from the early to the mid-1600s. We know very little of it from historians. They weren't writing about it because, well, they weren't here. And but from the fall of 2000 to 2012, nothing else happened at the site. And as much as I tried to get professional archaeologists to go there and continue our investigation of what was there and to try to preserve that site, because there was people with metal detectors who were actually in that area. I'd seen their potholes that were in the area, which scared the heck out of me. But then something happened in 2012, and what happened was the Loose Moose Enduro. And these trail bike, they put a trail bike, the trail bike system for this Loose Moose Enduro came right through the site, came right through it. And they would come through, and it was this wide and it was this deep, and they were just pouring through it. And I'm thinking, okay, it's time to do something. I don't care who's going to be with me. I'm going in. And I felt perfectly confident that I could do it. I was certified at KBIC as a native paraprofessional archaeologist. I was also their cultural resource specialist for a long time. And so I had a lot of experience working for them, plus also working with Buckmaster Northern and other universities. So I thought, well, I'm going in. I don't care if I'm a professional archaeologist or not. I'm Jimmy Schmucko from Negaunee, but I'm going in. And that's my Ojibwa name. I gave it to myself. But anyway, the NMU archaeologists at that time, when I said I'm going in, whether you're coming or not, it sort of forced their hand on it. And so both John Anderton, who was just a great friend of mine, and I see, of course, Martin Reinhardt, he was in here earlier, but that was a great friend of his as well, and Marla Buckmaster agreed to help excavate the site. So that was a big help. We then had to get a written permit, a required permit from Cleveland Cliffs who owned the property, and we did, in fact, do that, so that worked out good. But it was an all-volunteer effort, zero funding, okay? We were just going in, and we were going to do it in the kindness of our heart. And just so you can envision it in your mind, what the site looked like, and it looks like today, but it's been excavated. There was an old roadway. This was the logging roadway. It says roadway. It's like a two-rut road in this picture because that was taken years later, but that's in 1990 when they logged in there. That's the road that they came in and they opened it. So obviously there's the north side of the road and the south side of the road. And what they did was when they pushed through it, they put that road there. That road, from what we've been able to gather, sits on that trail. They followed the old trail, the footpath trail that went from here to the site, okay? So and that's real common. You'll see a lot of your roads today are on overland trails that have been there for thousands of years. That's not unusual. And that's what happened here. And so what we decided to do was, and this just shows you, in 2012 we took out the units you see in blue there. And then in 2013, we took out the units that you see in blue there. Now, here's what we found, and this was just awesome. On the north side of the road, and of course, again, that road wouldn't have been there, but a trail would have been there. On the north side of the road, it was very, very different than what was on just a matter of a few feet away on the south side of the road. The north side of the road, you had what was surely was where an occupation dwelling had been put, okay? And you could tell it was real evident because the soil there was compacted, it was dark, it was actually greasy to the touch, okay? And you can see here that really dark, the dark soils that are there, and you can see how it really would match up to what would be on the inside of say, a wigwam or a winter structure. And there was other things there that we could see inside when we excavated. We're taking them out. You could see almost where benches had been. There was places where there was pits, storage pits that had been put into where that structure was. So it was real evident that was sitting there. On the south side of the road was where they did all of their outdoor processing. This is where they skinned their animals. This is where they cooked their meat. This was where there was fire pits. There was fire-cracked rock in thousands of pieces of crushed up bone, and we're going to get into that in a minute. So it's obvious that you had, here's where they were sleeping and living, but over here is where you did all your work, which is like, yeah, no kidding. And it's exactly what you would imagine it would be, okay? But we hit it. We came right down on it. Now, one of the things to realize was that we didn't have to dig very deep. The cultural material was entirely located in that upper, what they call an A horizon. It was actually, most of it was still in the roots of the grass and the stuff that was growing there. So it was only like 10 to 15 centimeters deep, so everything was there. And so the question was, and you can see some of the documentation photos that everything is really shallow, and these are some of the hearths that we were taking out. Now, what did we find when we excavated there in 2012 and 13? We found glass beads like this one that you see right here, and that's sitting sitting in the roots of that tuft of grass. Okay, that's how shallow a lot of this stuff was. During 2012 and 13, we recovered 45 additional beautiful, beautiful glass trade beads. Okay, these were beads that were coming, of course, from Europe. Somehow got it all the way from the East Coast and made it all the way to right here, right to where we are today. These were incredible beads. We found almost 9,000 bone fragments and teeth, animal teeth, that were recovered when we excavated. Now, Dr. Terry Martin from the Illinois State Museum, he's an archaeobotanist, and so he studied all of this bone, and he identified the remains as being mostly, almost entirely moose, okay? In fact, he knows that he found the same tooth, the same back tooth, from 3 different moose. So he knows that there was at least 3 different moose, adult moose, that were butchered on that site, at least that many, okay? But there was also beaver bone, otter bone, porcupine, which is a yummy winter treat, and also muskrat, okay? Now, the bones were smashed into pieces, okay? Now, we also found the stone tools that they were using to smash this bone, okay? And we found numerous stone. Now, some people might be wondering, well, why did they crush this bone up, okay? Well, a lot of people here probably know, but I'm going to read this because this guy named Nicholas Dennis, who was very early, one of the early Frenchmen, he was with the Micmac in 1672, back in the 1600s, and he wrote this. And he said, they collected all the bones of the moose, pounded them with rocks upon another of larger size, reduced them to a powder. They then placed them in their kettle and made them boil well. This brought out a grease which rose to the top of the water, and they collected it with a wooden spoon. They kept the bones boiling until they yielded nothing more, and with such success that the bones of one moose, without counting the marrow that was in the bones, they obtained 5 to 6 pounds of grease as white as snow and firm as wax. It was this they used as their entire provisions for living when they went hunting. We call it moose butter. Sounds yummy, eh? Moose butter. Thinking, yeah, that's, what this told us immediately, it told us when someone was living there, because northern Anishinaabe, Algonquin seasonal movements tell us exactly when they were there hunting moose. It was a winter hunting site. This is when people hunted moose. This is when they hunted muskrat. This is when they hunted beaver. And I know a lot of people might think today, I know a lot of people think of, they trap beaver. Well, back then you didn't trap beaver. You hunted beaver in the wintertime. You went to their huts and into their holes, and they knew exactly how to do it. And it was the same with, so they left, and they did it in family groups, of course, in bands of people. But these bands would disperse into families, and these families would go to this spot, one would go to that spot. And essentially what you did was you just tried to survive winter. And if anybody has spent the winter anywhere near Goose Lake, that's right on the highland that really gets nailed with lake effect, okay? It gets like Negaunee Township gets bombed. I would have to suspect they were there in early winter because you wouldn't want to be there later in the winter. And they probably just kept on going south to another place to hunt. But they were there nonetheless in the wintertime. We found what they were using. We found what they were hunting the moose with. We found their arrowheads, their projectile points, and these are called Madison projectile points. These are actual arrowheads. And I know people think of arrowheads, they think of anything that anybody found in the last 10,000 years as an arrowhead. Well, that's not true. Bows and arrows were probably starting to be used maybe only about 1,500 to maybe 2,000 years ago. Before then, things were thrown with an addle or with thrusting spears. But bows and arrows became the way of hunting more recent time. And those little triangular points there are what armed them. And from those, and these are just tiny little things, but that's what brought down these moose. Because, and anybody here, I hunt deer, I hunt, big game animals, and it's not really what you hit them with, it's where you hit them. And you got to know how to, and you're going for a long shot and so on, and I don't care what you're shooting with. If you hit them in the rear end, you ain't going to get them. You got to hit them right. And these people knew exactly what they were doing, especially if they were taking moose. It's a big animal. We also found some more of the smaller, some of the tools that they were using, the stone tools that they were using. They were flake tools. We found their fire flints, which they used to make their fires. And we found wedges, and we found scrapers, and so on. But not a lot of them, okay? Not a lot of them. Then on Wednesday, and I got it written down here, Wednesday, August 15, 2012 at 10:42, because I documented everything, a fifth ring was found. And again, you want to see some people doing some jumping up and down and hopping around. And it was another IHS ring. And that was the fifth ring that showed up on that site. And it was amazing and look at the condition of those rings, okay? It's like you had them in your dresser drawer for the last 400 years. The soil conditions at this site, and I'm not going to get into it because it'll bore the heck out of you, but John Anderton, who was a geoarchaeologist, came there and he said, it's a sweet spot. It's a 1 in a million spot. Everything is preserved in this one spot because of the soil that's there, okay? And it's a real unique type of a soil. But you can see these rings, they still had a shine to them. They just turned green from oxidation, but they still have their original shine from the polish. They didn't even oxidize enough to actually even erase that. And that's why we found so much things in good shape. Found another piece of one more piece of a cut brass kettle fragment. We would have expected to find that. And we found something that nobody ever finds. One of those iron-eyed sewing needles that the fur traders said they were bringing here by the thousands. You don't find them. You know why? They rust away. But there was one sitting here. It looked like you dropped it. It was just a little bit rusty. You could still see the eye on it. It was just amazing. And then we found something that is really still a mystery. This is in the early 1600s, okay? The people living up here didn't have firearms. But on this particular site, as far as we know, they didn't have firearms. There was 3 small lead shot found within the area where the dwelling had occurred. Two of the shot were just dropped. They had never been fired. You could tell they'd never been fired. But one of them had been fired. It was sort of misshapen and it was highly oxidized. So it probably came back to the camp in a chunk of meat, okay? Somebody there had a firearm, which would be, and if you know anything again about this early time of our history, that is extremely unusual, that there would be someone there with a firearm. Now, there's always a possibility that one of the gift items that was traded, that was given, because most of the stuff you think of, well, they're trade items, but they're actually gift items going back and forth. One of the gift items may have been a firearm to somebody that was living here, to one of the Ojibwa people that was living here. It's also possible that this is the early 1600s, but it's also possible that there was a Frenchman living with these Ojibwa people. And I say that because one of the things that happened when the first French came to Quebec region, the vast majority of them were just guys, okay, that came from France, and they didn't have anything back in France. They came here for a new life. And one of the big problems the French government had was that so many of these young men were just disappearing off into the wilderness. And they went off to live among native peoples throughout the Great Lakes region. And it started happening in the early 1600s. And there was times when almost the entire village back up in Quebec was deserted because everybody took off in canoes. And they never returned. And they assimilated in with the Ojibwa, with a lot of the other tribes as well, with all of the Anishinaabe, with the Yodawa, with the Potawatomi, with the Ojibwa. They became family, and they became very welcomed. If you look at the oral histories of the Ojibwa oral histories, you'll see that these first Frenchmen that came in were very welcomed. In fact, they were so welcomed they married the women within the groups. And if anybody wonders why so many of the tribal members, Ojibwa tribal members got French last names, there's a reason. And a lot of it goes back generations and generations. So that is a mystery, but we'll never really know, will we? but someone there had a firearm, which is just, again, that's totally unexpected. And then we found this. It's real tiny. It's real, very, very delicate. And it was a piece of what they call wound glass, and it was just sort of half of a circle. Had us totally mystified. What in the world is this? No one has ever found, when I look at all of the archaeological data, you don't see this anywhere. Now we're going to come back to that piece. Now, the other thing we're looking for, you're just not looking for artifacts. So people think when an archaeologist out there, well, they're just trying to find things, artifacts. Well, that's not true at all. Artifacts are only one small part of what you're looking for. You're trying to find evidence of what was there. So one of the things that we're looking for that we found was the hearths. You had both a hearth that was internal within the structure, which you would expect, and you had multiple hearths outside for cooking purposes, okay? And we found them. You also had what we call pit features. Pit features would have been storage areas where things would have been, a hole would have been dug in the ground, food, other items would have been stored. You didn't have shelves per se. You actually put stuff into the ground and you put covers over it. And we found numerous of these pit features. And you can see here, that's the north side of the road. All of the features that were those were the features that were located, mostly all pit features. This number 7 is a hearth feature where there was inside a nice fire pit. And if you go down here, when we excavated then, most of those what you see down there were actually hearths in their outside cooking area, okay, on the south side of the road. One of the things when you find a hearth or when you find a feature, you just don't say, oh, here's a feature and throw the dirt away. You save it. And we took the samples from all of these, from these features. If there was a pit feature, we saved the dirt, okay? We bagged it and we sent it off for analysis to see what actually was what was left inside of that feature. Now, Katie Parker is an archaeobotanist and very, very well known nationwide. And she just lives on the other side, just south of Mackinac City. So it made it kind of nice because she came up, and plus we were going back and forth, and I could deliver dirt bags to her in St. Ignace out of my trunk, which she got to hate me for doing that. But anyway, but she did a really nice job of trying to figure out what's inside those dirt bags. But what she found out was that there was no doubt. She said that site was a winter occupation because there was no berries. There was there's nothing there that you would expect to find at all in a summer or a spring, summer, fall occupation. It was almost entirely just pieces of wood and various types of wood. And what she wrote in her report was that wood was recovered in high frequencies from some samples reflecting large fires needed for cold weather occupation and or major game processing cooking events. So it matched up. Which we found in there, and what she was able to add to us really matched up well to what we had found. Then we found something again that was really unusual, because when you're excavating, you're very carefully looking at every grain of dirt. And we noticed that in one of the units, and this was again where the occupation structure was on the north side of the road, we came across something that looked very unusual, and it looked like it was the remnants of bark. It looks like a sheet of maybe birch bark. And so that's what we thought it was. So we all just gathered around, and it took us a long time. And we were able to just extract piece by piece those fragments, try not anything to break, and get it up and get it to the lab up at Northern so that we could actually take it apart, get the dirt from that particular pieces of bark that was 400 years old to see what it was. And we were thinking, oh, it's got to be birch bark, That's was just us thinking that. But when Katie looked at it, she said, no, it is not birch bark. It's black ash, which you would expect to find. A lot of people might not realize, I know you do, that black ash is used for making baskets. It's used for making, the Anishinaabe Ojibwa use it for a variety of things. The wood itself, because it's very flexible, you can do things with it. But the bark itself served, particularly for winter structures. It's got a lot of. It's a little bit thicker than birch bark. Birch bark is really nice for rain, resisting rain and water, whereas black ash goes up against the sides, and that's more. There's more of it's a little bit warmer. It's got more of an insulating factor to it. So it's very common to see. If you go back and look at our oral histories, and if you looked at some of the historical accounts of the earlier wigwams from even the 18th and 17th century, black ash was used a lot on making Ojibwa structures. So it was just amazing that we actually found a sheet of that black ash that was laying there, and we preserved it. Now, question: Question is, where's my water? Because I'm talking so much, my voice is going away here. Here we go. Hang on, I got it. There we go. The biggest question, we always ask it, especially as an archaeologist. How old is the site? When did people actually live there? What do the gifts from the Boone tell us? What do these gifts tell us? Seek the answers from these gifts. We know that the arrowheads that we found was a common type of an arrowhead because these triangular points, but they were common from around 1000 AD through the 1700s, okay, until they were entirely replaced by firearms. But people continued to use them into the 1700s, and until arrowheads were replaced by metal, by brass and steel and iron tips. The trade items that you see, that very small handful of trade items that were there, those are actually common trade items throughout the 1600s and the 1700s. There's really nothing there that stands out as something that isn't from that 200-year period. But the rings told us, the rings are what they call a diagnostic artifact. Those particular rings, we know, date from around 1625 to 1660. So that puts us in the ballpark. Now, here's the great thing about the beads, okay, and I'm going to read this. This is a guy named William Fitzgerald. This is from one of the papers that he wrote. This guy is an archaeologist from Ontario, and he's really studied a lot of the Huron sites and the such that date back to the same time period, a little bit to the 1600s, mid 1600s. And he's a bead expert. He figured this out, and he says this: because bead assemblages change frequently, no other artifact can be more valuable than glass beads as a chronological indicator. Okay, and what he's saying is that. Certain beads are only used for certain periods of time. They're only manufactured and traded for a certain period of time. Then the style changes. The supplier changes. The manufacturer changes. And so the other beads that are being brought to North America change. And then they change again. And when you think about it, and you're talking the assemblage. So when you look at an assemblage of beads, think about kitchens. And think about our own history, modern history. This is a good example right here that if you go back to the 1880s, just think of a kitchen. And the assemblage is everything that's in the kitchen. Okay, you got your stove, you got your table, you got your dishes, you got your spoons and forks and everything else that's there, pots and pans. 1880s, the kitchen looked a lot different than it does all of a sudden in 1900. And it looks a lot different than it did in the 1920s, the 1940s, 60s, and into the 1980s. The kitchen changes because the things that are in that kitchen change. Technology changes, styles change, a lot of things change. Now, there's going to be a few things that are going to be carried from one kitchen to the next because they're going to be your favorite spoon, your favorite dishes, so on and so forth. So there's going to be things that you would call heirloom items that are going to continue. But for the most part, the assemblage will change over time, okay? The same is true with beads. So when did people occupy this winter campsite? And that's probably in studying Ojibwa winter occupation dwellings, it probably looked like that. It was probably more of a leaning pole thing. It wasn't a wigwam shaped thing. But you're talking something that you're fighting the weight of the snow and so on and so forth. That is a winter lodge right there, okay? And that's probably, plus one of the things that we noticed, and I'll just jump on that for a minute, if it was a wigwam, there would have been post molds. There was 0 post molds, none. It's telling you it was probably leaning pieces of wood that were put onto the surface, held in place by rocks, and we found the rocks were there too, that probably held a lot of those poles in place. And that would be common, and you would see birch bark over the top part, and you would see like black ash really making big part of that structure right there. It's pretty much exactly what we had there. Now, I was lucky one more time because Carol Mason introduced me to a young woman named Heather Walder, and she was from La Crosse, Wisconsin. And at the time when we were studying this, I knew nothing about trade beads. I'm the last guy in the world you ever think would know anything about trade beads. But I was really interested in them. But Heather Walder was an expert on it. And so she asked me if I would co-author a paper with her on the trade beads. And so I told her, yeah, but I got a lot to learn. And so what I did was I studied and I studied and I studied and I studied and I read and I studied and I read and I studied and I read. And I became sort of like I'll call a semi-expert on beads. I actually did. And so we were able to co-author a major paper together, and it really pushed the fame, I guess, if you will, at all, of this particular site here in Goose Lake to across the nation. It was called Glass Trade Beads from Goose Lake Outlet Number 3, Marquette County. It was published in 2017 in the Mid-Continental Journal of Archaeology, which is a major, archaeological publication. And what we did was we studied the beads, and we used this technique, and I'll just, not to bore you, but it's called seriation is the name of the technique that you use to date the beads. And what we did was, I could be here all night and I could bore the crap out of you if I told you what it was. I'm not going to do it. Our 2017 study determined, this was a surprise, that the vast majority of the individual bead types were dated to what they call a glass bead period, okay? And again, not to bore you, but that's sort of the time period. Those are beads that were being distributed here in North America from 1600 to about 1600 to about, say, 1625, 1630. Very old beads. And glass bead period 3 are the beads that were being distributed here in North America from about 1625 to around 1650. And so when you looked at the assemblage as a whole, and you considered heirloom beads, that it told us that the site probably dated to the 1630s. And again, you got to jump up and down and whoop and say, nobody had ever found anything that old, okay? And so the result of that study, and this is what we wrote in there, is a temporal identification of the Goose Lake Outlet glass bead assemblage to circa 1630s, making it one of the oldest, if not the oldest, and it is in fact the oldest, known assemblage of glass trade beads ever found within the modern boundaries of Michigan. Found right here. Then again, I'm not going to bore you on this because plus I would sound really stupid after trying to tell you something I don't really know a whole lot about. But carbon-14 dating, what we did was we actually took samples of some of the moose bone and we did what they call C14 dates, to try to determine how old the bone was. And what we found was that you see that circle right there. That smaller, orangish type circle or whatever color that is, that shows you where these dates sort of line up. And if you look where they line up, it line up exactly in the time period that we said the beads date to, and everything else dates to. So, and this was put out by Rob Legg and Scott Demel from Northern, who did this, who wrote this particular paper. And what they said was that both of the moose bone samples are consistent with the bead assemblage analysis and the suggested date of occupation within the 1630s. Again, it matched up. And we're going, oh, wow, this is really great, because you're always worried that something's going to show up that's going to make you look stupid, okay, when you're doing this kind of work. And it never did. It never did show up. And so what we knew was, what we had was, okay, at that time, 2017, it was truly a one-of-a-kind, no one ever found it before, Lake Superior region winter inland hunting campsite that dated back to the time period of the 1630s, okay? Now, I wanted to go back and do some more work there, but I couldn't get anybody to go. So once again, my hat and my face grew older from 2013 to 2021 because nothing else happened at the site itself. Now, I got to tell you this, it dawned on me that picture there of me, that nice young-looking man there, that was actually taken in 2003. So I aged a lot in those years. If I was wearing the same hat, that hat is like, it's a piece of crap, but you got to wear it, you know. It's my favorite hat. But anyway, so I aged quite a bit, but it was tough to get anybody there. So I said, okay, I'm going in. I'm going to be 70 years old. What the heck? If I don't do this, it's never going to happen because no one's going to come in. So I said, I'm going in. And so in the spring of 2021, I drew up plans to put in a limited number of excavation units. And what I was planning on, I wasn't going there to find more stuff. Okay, I wanted to go there and I wanted to finish mapping the site. Because when we had excavated in 12 and in 13, we came down smack dab right on the middle, like I say, somebody put an X there, we came right down on this rich part of the site. But we didn't really know what the boundaries were. Where did it end? Where did the snow all of a sudden pile up in the end of the work area end? Where did the snow pile up in the end of the structure end? And so what I wanted to do was try to draw in, by putting in units, just try to figure out where those features or those boundaries, where they ended, okay? And I also knew that large parts of the area had been disturbed or destroyed because they had logged there, okay? So where were those areas where there was undisturbed deposits maybe still sitting? I partnered up with the Marquette Regional History Center. Chris Osier did a great job of convincing Cleveland Cliffs to give us a permit to go in there. I tried. They wouldn't give it to me, but old sweet-talking Chris, she went to the same sources, and she got the permit. And so if you know Chris, you know what I mean. She's pretty good at it. And then, but anyway, who else was I going to get to go there? John Anderton sadly passed away. He passed away in the summer, right after we were done with the other project, 2014. Buckmaster, who had worked on that site, she just retired completely from archaeology due to some very serious health issues, and she just backed right out. And I tried to get other professional regional archaeologists to try to help out, and nobody would help, which was, I thought, okay, I'm going in. So the volunteers, you're looking at them. It was my French-Indian Métis family, and we went out there, and my best friend Randy Champion and my cousin Sue Bellinger, we went out there and we were going to excavate it on our own. And but I did get the help of this guy right here. Got a hard time saying his name. He's originally from Montreal, but he lives in the United States now. He married a woman from Marquette here. That's how I got to meet him. But he lived out in Connecticut. And Luke Litwini Anuek. If you could say that, I gotta read it because I never remember his name. One of the greatest humans you ever met. He came out to that site to help me. He had stage 4 pancreatic cancer. And he came all the way from Connecticut to help me, and I couldn't get somebody from Marquette to come and help me. And then I had this guy's a great guy. Remember talking about Terry Martin, the faunal expert, the bone guy? I used to call him Dr. Bones. He come all the way up from Illinois. He came up and spent 2 weeks helping me, both summers that we were out there. He spent the whole week up here. We had a great time out at camp. Brought him to the Pine Grove, showed him off. It was fun. Anyway. But I knew what to do. I had done it before, many, many times. But what was important, but the pressure was on. If I was going to do it, I had to do it right. Because I didn't want to come under criticism by professional archaeologists that I just stepped in there as Jimmy Schmuckel and went in there. And so I made sure that we were going to follow to the T proper techniques. And that meant that you document everything you do. Because if it isn't documented, it never, ever happens. So you write your square sheets to your notes, to put numbers on bags, to doing everything. You take documentation, photos, and movies of everything. I got this huge collection of photos and a huge collection of movies, which are just awesome. In fact, you're looking at some of the photographs here. So on August 2nd, we started taking out 2 of the north units, and again, that would have been where that winter structure that you see there a depiction of. That's what sat there. And we started, and what we found out right away was that both of these north units, they were mostly sterile. They were largely disturbed by the modern logging activities. But we did find just a very small amount of animal bone. We found a moose tooth, which was, moose tooth again. And we found just a few pieces of fire-cracked rock. But then one of the things we did was when we had finished excavating back in 2013, we were right on the edge of a what we call a pit feature, and we only took out half because we didn't take out. This time we took out the other half of the unit, so I knew that feature was there. And on that bottom of that feature, when we took it out back in 2013, right on the very bottom of it were 2 incredibly beautiful robin egg blue oval beads were sitting right on the bottom down there. And so I couldn't wait to finish taking out that particular thing. And sure enough, right on the very bottom of that feature, which is maybe about that deep, okay, there was another very early 1600s French glass trade bead. It was more of it was a different color. It was amber colored, okay. It's kind of an odd color, a yellow amber color. And it's very, very tiny. It's like a seed bead. So you really got to keep your eyes peeled. You see how small it is in my hand? And but it's as tiny as it is, it's invaluable as to us as somebody who's trying to figure out what's there. Now, we didn't find much on the north side of the road, but that's okay. Finding little to nothing was a success. In fact, it sort of relieved us. We determined that because we had determined the east and the southeast boundary of that large occupation feature. By taking out those, we knew, okay, we're done. That's it. We completed the excavation, everything that we could. Everything else has been destroyed. So the next thing we did is we moved south across the road to the large outdoor meat processing area. And you probably don't remember from the pictures I was showing you when we were there in 2012 and 13. It looked a lot different because a lot of these trees had just grown up there. And if you look all around us on the ground, it's hard to tell by looking, but that's poison ivy, okay? And there's not a lot of poison ivy here in Marquette County. Very little. You never see it. It's everywhere there, but only on the south side of the road. For whatever reason, there's none on the north side of the road, which is me to there away. But over here, it's all poison ivy. But it's a little bit different soil conditions there. So we had to use gloves and so on, and be very careful because you can go there and you can cut the poison ivy plants out of there, but you got the roots, which are worse because that's where all you got all your saps and stuff in the roots. So you got to be extremely careful when you're on that south side of the road. And I got bit a few times, but I'll tell you what. Everybody was sort of like disappointed when we were on the north side of the road. We got to the south side of the road. I thought, okay, this might be good over here. And sure enough, on the very first shovelful, after finding basically nothing on the other side of the road, very first shovelful, bingo, there's a beautiful, again, another robin egg blue bead right off the bat. And one of the things that, and I will say this, we were happy to find anything, but there was something, and Karen will tell you because she excavated with us, there was something about finding a trade bead that made you jump up and down because they were so beautiful, they were so tiny, and they were so precious, you know what I mean? And to find a bead, a trade bead, as tiny as they were, I'll tell you what, it just brought joy into your life. And then on the next day, we hit the jackpot. That's Karen, and that's that's my grandson, Joshy there, who was there. And it's great having these little kids. People might be thinking, you should have a trained archaeologist. You put a little kid on those screens right there, their eyeballs are right there. They're into it. They can see everything. Old man like me, you can't see nothing. Those kids are there. They pick out everything that's in there. And we would screen through a regular screen. Then we would fine screen through like a window screen. We double screened everything. And the kids that we had out there, which are our grandkids, they were just amazing at what they would see. Nothing got past them kids, I'm telling you right now. But Karen, you could see the happy look on her face because on the next day, on the very first shovelful again, as soon as they got plopped into the screen, there was a bead showing already up there. It was already showing in that clump of poison ivy roots. And then as you started to break it apart, another one pops up. And then Joshy, my grandson, was sitting there, and they were screening, and then this stuff, and they screened it. And he comes walking over to me, he says, "Grandpa, what is this?" And because he would bring it 100 times. I don't care what it was, if it was a rock or whatever. Grandpa, what is this? What is it? Because he knew better. You can always throw it away in the lab. We're never throwing it away out here. If you think it's something, bring it over here. He comes over there with that, and I'm thinking, I have no idea what this is. But what it is it's something that nobody has ever found before here in North America. I'm not making this up. Because I asked other archaeologists who have been excavating in Ontario, in Quebec, and in New York on these early sites to find out, do you know what this could be? It's a hollow tube. It looks like it's like a Venetian bead today, okay? It's the same as a Venetian bead. But there were no Venetian beads back in 1620, okay? So it's just a super rare black glass. It's a curved tube. But it's obvious it's a piece of jewelry of some sort. And how it got from Europe to Goose Lake is, it's amazing that it actually showed up here with this early Ojibwa family. It could have been used in the nose, could have been used in the ear, could have been used in a bead, could have been used as anything, but it was used as something. Somebody dropped it. Joshy found it. Then there was another glass trade bead, then another one, so we're finding. But we found, besides the beads, we began to find, again, hundreds of pieces of broken animal bone. Of course, in this area where they were doing their cooking and processing. Hundreds of pieces began to show up. And you can see there's a moose leg. A lot of the pieces were tiny. That's a moose leg fragment. That's from Terry was there, and he said, "Oh, that's cool. That's a moose scapula." And I'm going, "Oh, I'm glad you're here because it just looks like a piece of bone." But he knew what these bones were, where they fit onto an animal. And then, of course, we found a lot of these cooked bone fragments. Lots of those small cooked bone fragments that were crushed up and boiled. okay, to get at the fat, so you found a lot of that. Now, because there was all this cooking going on there we found large quantities of what they call FCR, and that just stands for fire cracked rock. It was loaded with fire cracked rock. And one of the more amazing things that we came across was this intact buried hearth, which is really super cool. And a lot of people think that, and I got to tell you this, here's a mistake that a lot of people think when they think about people in the past making fire pits. They always think like we do today, where we put a circle of rocks and we put the stuff in there. That's not how they made their hearths. What they do is, particularly in the wintertime, you put a pavement down and you put your fire on top of that pavement. And there was reasons to do that because you heated those rocks. And those rocks also kept your heat. It was very efficient. It wasn't like heating the dirt. It was heating those rocks. And a lot of times those rocks, the rocks were used for cooking, but also those hot rocks could be carried into your living structure and used as for heat. And that happened a lot of times, because when we were inside the living structure that was across the road, you just found just big pieces of rock here, one rock over here, be 2 or 3 rocks. And it was obvious what they were doing was that they were carrying in heated rocks and going like this in the winter. And so that's what, when you find these ancient hearths, and I don't care if you go back 10,000 years or 400 years, that's what a hearth looks like right there. It's a pavement of rock, not a circle of rocks, okay? Circle of rocks is something that came later with the Europeans. I'm not kidding you, okay? We found another stone tool. This is another, a large stone flake as a hide scraper, another butchering tool, exactly what you would expect to find on this site, where they were not only cooking the moose, they also got the hides from these animals. They got beaver hides, they got moose hides, okay? And what they're doing is that they're processing those hides, okay? And so you would expect to find their tools, and you did. And of course, as you're using a stone tool and you're scraping and you're using these large scrapers and stuff, you're continually resharpening it, because it's just stone. And the way you resharpen it is you take it and you just go poof, and you just pop off little flakes off the edge and you put that edge back on there. And so what you're going to find is these little tiny, some of them are really tiny, they're hard to see, but again, Joshy with those little eyes, he picked them out. And all of these little called retouch or resharpening flakes that were in this area where you knew that they were processing these hides, okay, which is exactly what you would expect to find. Now, there was obvious site disturbances on the south side of the road too. There was push berms, and everything seemed to be just kind of disturbed. So in 2021, we totally accomplished what we wanted to do. And what we did was, of course, on the north side, we took out those units on the east side, didn't find much. Down on the other side, we found quite a bit, but then we also found where it was just totally disturbed and there was nothing left there, okay? So that worked out well. The next year, we decided that we were just going to finish up on the mapping of the south occupation feature. And what I'm talking about there is that you can see here, we're done on the north side. On the south side, we're essentially done down in that area. But there's still a stretch in there that you can see where that question mark is between where we finished up and the roadway. So, but we also knew that that old roadway, the logging roadway, would have went into that, because what you see there is a 2-route road that's there today, essentially. But we know that part of that was going to be disturbed because there was already push berms and everything else. So we decided to go on the north side to map that. And once again, there they were, all volunteer family team. We were all out there, and everybody was pretty experienced and pretty fired up. They knew exactly what we were going after. And that's my brother Dave standing there, and that's Randy. And of course, that's Sue Bellinger and the grandkids, Josh and Josie, and then Karen standing there. But we started excavating by the road, and these are from my notes. I'm taking copious notes. I'm writing down mostly sterile, looks to be very disturbed, very little here. We were in the old roadway, obvious disturbance. So what we found out was on the north side there, or on the north side of the south occupation feature, it was disturbed. It was destroyed from a cultural standpoint. Everything there from an archaeological standpoint had been destroyed. However, even though it had been jumbled up and destroyed, look at a happy face there. That was Karen, and we hit the jackpot, because in one of those disturbed areas, she recovered these 2, again, very early pre-1630 glass trade beads. And you can see the 2 of them there. That's after we cleaned them up. That's what you found them. That's when we got them home. One is just this beautiful dark blue, navy blue, translucent bead, and the other one is more like a little white tube bead that you would see there. And those are very, very early diagnostic beads. Now, what we did was at that point, we decided, okay, we're done. And I was thinking, but Terry Martin was coming down to spend a week down there, and I thought, we've already mapped everything, so I'm thinking, I got to find something for us to do when Terry gets here. So we decided that what we were going to do is we were going to go to the south edge, and we had already written that off because it was just, there was disturbances there was a trench going through, there was berms over there, and so we decided we weren't going to go there. But I thought, well, what's the difference? We got to do something, so when Terry gets here, it makes it look like we're still doing something. And there's an old saying, hey, I'd rather be lucky than good. Well, I'll tell you what, this is the case of where I was a lot luckier than I was good. Because when we went to that far south area and we put in a unit there, the first unit, we recovered almost 1,200 pieces of animal bone, 64 pieces of FCR in the buried deposits. Now, what we came across and what we were able to determine that this was the area where they were throwing all of their stuff. It wasn't the stuff where they were working, but think about it. As you're processing bone and cooking and you're changing the stones in your fire pit, you're going to go, boop, just like you do today. And this is an area where they were discarding things from their fire pits, okay? And so there was all of these cooked bone in FCR that were just jumbled up in that area. But then, Terry Martin, he's crawling because we're going to take a photograph of the level there. And he says to me, Jim, what is this? And I look at it and I go, yoo-hoo! You know what that is? And he looks at me like I'm nuts. It's the other half of that ring that we found in 2013, okay? It was the other half. And it's a piece of jewelry. It's not a bead, but it's a piece of European glass jewelry. And it's something that could be used as either a hoop earring or it could be used as a nose ornament, which is very common. People were using both. And so it's a piece of jewelry, 1 in a million piece again. And we got almost the entire whole thing. And in fact, there's just a little piece missing, but in reality, maybe that piece wasn't even there to start with. Because if you want to poke it through your nose, you're not going to worry about that little piece. You got to get it through there. And that's very well what it could have been. Because the early French, when they talk about coming into the upper Great Lakes, one of the things they noted, particularly not among, these are two smaller girls, but men in particular liked having pierced noses. That the Anishinaabe people, they wore earrings. They liked to wear a lot of jewelry. And one of the things was nose pieces. And so that's very possible that that's what it was, but it's very delicate. Very, very delicate. And it broke. And they were found in adjoining units, but they were only found a bit this far apart. So they were only a matter of maybe a foot to 2 feet apart. So when it snapped from wherever it did, it fell right there. Okay? Which was kind of amazing. Then we just started to take out the last unit, and we just did it because we had the time to do it, and we didn't expect to find anything because it looked terrible. On the south side there, it was pushed, it was disturbed, there was a trench, there was a push berm, so on and so forth. And we didn't find a whole lot in that unit, which we didn't expect to. But, again, we succeeded in mapping that south side of the south unit, of the south occupation feature. And this was my very last, this is the very last thing I put in my logbook. It's my last entry. It said, I've offered tobacco and said miigwech in a goodbye to my ancestors who once lived here and are still here in spirit. And I got to tell you this, every day that I left that site, I did that. I didn't just do it that day, I did it every day. And every day when I got there, I'd get to before everybody else, I'd go, hey, bonjour! And I would talk to the people that were there. And I would actually talk to them, and I could feel them, that they were there. They were actually there. And so when I left, that was the last time, and I put that tobacco on that one rock that you saw that was there in 1996 when I found the rings. That same rock was sitting there where that site is, and that's where I put that with my old hat. Took the hat home, of course. But what we found, but even though we were just mapping, we still recovered another almost 1,500 pieces of animal bone, several flake tools, a lot of the resharpening flakes. That's important information. And we found lots of the fire-cracked rock, but we found 8 more beads. We found that glass hoop fragment that matched up, and we found that curved that tube. But most importantly, again, what we accomplished was the final mapping of those 2 sites. So we were done there. And so we got in all of the hearth features, we got in all the pitch features, and so we were able to record exactly what was there, over 400 years ago when someone was there. Now, just talk a little bit more, and I know I'm not running out of time yet, but I'm getting, I'll be done just in time. Here's what I believe, and I know there's people that might think that, well, you shouldn't be out collecting artifacts and so on and so forth. Well, that's true, unless you're doing it for the right reasons. You shouldn't be just out collecting things and just doing it just because they're cool. And I actually resent that myself. But here's what I believe is that, and it's exactly as I wrote it here, artifacts are gifts given to us by our ancestors. And through these wonderful gifts, they whisper to us about their lives. And the reason that's true is, think about this. These people that lived back then, or these people that lived in Paleo-Indian times, they didn't leave any notes, they didn't leave any books, they didn't leave any records. They just left behind one thing. They left behind this. And if we study those things, if we actually take them and seriously study them and respectfully study them, these things, they speak to us. They tell us who those people were, what they were doing. They'll never tell you their names, but they will tell you so much more about them than we would have ever known if we just ignored these things. Now, the artifacts that we found here, for example, when I say the cultural material is what I refer to it as. Of course, we know from the stone arrowheads, from the bone crushing rocks, and from the other butchering tools, and plus the 12,000 pieces of animal bone that we found there. We know that tells us what was there. Okay, that tells us that it was a winter hunting camp that a family had lived at. And again, it's a family that had lived there. But the French trade items are a little bit more specific because they date to not to this maybe a 2,000 to 3,000 time period where they could all be the same. These are pretty specific, and you're able to date these things. Okay, particularly you can date the beads. Okay, and so what we know is, again, what we've done is we're still studying these things. Okay, I gotta say that we're still continuing to study some of these artifacts and trying to put together a more comprehensive final paper on this. And so I'm sort of letting the cat out of the bag on some of this information I'm telling you about now. But we updated our analysis of that bead assemblage because we had more beads. Plus we had more knowledge. We were smarter than all we were back then in 2017. And we took more data, more things that are coming up. And what we found out, surprisingly in a sense, is that the majority of the beads, the vast majority of them beads, predate 1630. They're from back around 1600 to maybe 1620. There's actually beads there that predate 1600. And how in the world did they end up here? Right here, okay? A lot of these things, what they would call, like some of them beads, they were popular all the way through from 1600 to 1650. People, they loved that color, they loved that shape. So you're going to see those. And some of those trade items, like I say, now, those are two mysterious items down there, that glass tube and that glass ring. We don't know what those are. We know that the brass rings were definitely dated from a certain time period. And those beautiful red beads you see there, those are called tube beads. Those didn't come to North America. Those didn't become popular till after 1630, probably maybe 1635. They weren't real popular among Anishinaabe people, that red bead, but they were very, very popular among Iroquoian people. That was their favorite color. Up here, favorite color, what we see is that they love those blue beads. They love the sky blue beads and the dark blue beads. And you'll see that not only on this site, but you see that on other sites that was their preference. Bring us those blue beads. They love those beads. And so you can see that they dominate this collection as well. It's exactly what you'd see on other sites. Now, here's the biggest question. Who was there? You know what I mean? Who was living at Goose Lake, on the Goose Lake Outlet, in the early 1600s? Now, that's a map. That's a map, mid-1600s French map. UP is just part of the UP is on it. They didn't even know we were here. Okay, I mean, they knew we were here, but they didn't know who was here. And you could only see, they knew that the Saulteaux, the Ojibwa, were living at the Sioux. They knew they were there, but they didn't really know what was beyond that. And certainly here, we're not even on that map, okay? We're not even on the map here in Marquette. And so the question is, who was here? Now, this is what I'm working on right now. And it says, I'm currently doing extensive research to identify the specific band or clan of early 1600s Central Lake Superior ancestral Ojibwa people who spent their cold winters hunting moose here. And that's because we know that it wasn't a tribe per se. It wasn't a tribe. These were bands and clans and families that belonged to these bands of families that belonged to the clans. Okay, and so you got to really think of it in those terms when you're doing your research, and which is different than what some people might imagine. So to determine what I'm doing now is to determine who was living here at Goose Lake Outlet here in Marquette during this proto-historic period. Early 1600s, 400 years ago, who was living here? You got to rely on three sources of evidence. Number one, we've been talking about it. The archaeological and cultural material evidence. Okay, we got that. We pretty much nailed that. The other thing you got to rely on, that because this is during proto-historic time, when there's hardly any records whatsoever, you've got to really rely on Ojibwa and Anishinaabe oral history. And if you really pay attention, and I got to tell you what, I've been paying attention to that for years, and it's sort of like it varies from person to person, from writer to writer, but it all blends together, and there's a story there, and it will tell you a lot about who was here. Okay. The other thing was some of the French earlier written recorded history. There's hardly any of it, but there is some, and what I'm finding out is there's more than what people thought there was. There was things that were written. Things that were written by the Jesuits, things that were written by Champlain, things that were written by some of the very earliest of the explorers. Now, 99 and 9/10% of every Frenchman who came to the Great Lakes probably didn't even know how to write, let alone write a record. But there were some people who did. And I'm trying to find, I've been searching those records, plus checking out old maps. But the one thing that we do know, and everybody in this room knows it, that we know who was here. This was home. This was home to the Anishinaabe people, home to the Three Fires Confederacy. A lot of the people from the Potawatomi and Odawa, they settled more down this way, that way, and then this way and that way. But across Lake Superior, this became the homeland of the Ojibwa clans, and that's the other thing, is that when you're trying to figure out, we talk about, I'll be talking to certain crowds depending upon the audience, and you say, well, these were Ojibwa. Well, that's really clumping everything together. These were bands of people that belonged to clans, to belong to these totems. And so which one of them was here, okay? And that's part of what I'm trying to find out now. Now, when I look at, I've done a lot of reading that I can, and plus listening to some people talk, give oral histories. But there's people that have written, Eddie Benton I did a good job of summarizing the migration story of the story of of people coming here, of the Anishinaabe people coming here into Lake Superior, into the Great Lakes region, and he admitted. I talked to him. I spent two of the most best days of my life with Eddie Benton Benai, when we were up on Eagle Rock up there trying to stop the mining company from coming in, and I heard right from his voice him tell the migration story, and it was just an incredible experience. But this is from his book. But what he did was, he sort of summarized it. He said also, the stories are as varied as the faces of the people who are telling you these stories. There's always going to be a little variance to them. But he really sort of formalized it in his book to try to make some sense out of all of the oral histories that are out there. And of course, if you look at the southern part of the UP here, the Upper Peninsula, not the southern part of Lake Superior, we know who was here. Now, the French records. This is interesting, because which band of people, which clan was situated here 400 years ago out of the various clans? And we know that there was people, French will tell you, and of course the oral histories will tell you the same thing. They'll coincide and they'll tell you the same thing. And they will tell you that that obviously people were at Sault Ste. Marie, at the Rapids. And that's where there was a large congregation of people there. But then they moved west. Different clans moved westward. There's people that lived at Grand Island and Munising area. We know that there was people that lived at Lance, in Keweenaw Bay, and of course there was people that made it all the way to the end of the Lake Superior. They went all the way down to La Pointe, down to the Madeline Islands, and of course they spread out throughout this. But we also know both from records and plus also the oral histories, that when the Anishinaabe moved here, nobody really knows exactly when that migration occurred. It was probably somewhere around maybe 600 years ago. Taking a wild-ass guess, but that's what a lot of people would guess at. And so they were living here, and they spread out. But there were already people here. There was other people that were already living in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, okay? And so in some of those people, they got along with very, very well. There's other people like the Sioux and other ones, the Winnebago, they didn't get along with them at all. And so there was a lot of strife between the various groups, between the various clans of the various tribes. But one of the things that you'll see is that the French mentioned it, and also it shows up in the oral histories, is that in the central part of the Upper Peninsula, here in the Marquette area, there was people here who the French referred to as the Nokwe people. And of course, then they also talked about the Menominee people who lived to the south, in the southern part of the Upper Peninsula. But there were Nokwe people that lived here, and they're called Noka, Nook. There's different names. These people, they were Algonquian-speaking people. They spoke the same language as the Menominee too. They spoke Algonquian, which was the same as the Ojibwa and the Dawa, but different variances of the language, obviously. But it was the same language, but it was their. It was like the difference between speaking English in the United States and speaking English in England. They say privacy. And I'm saying, why do they say privacy? It's privacy. But anyway, that's what they're talking about, the Queen. And I'm thinking, privacy of the Queen. But anyway, so there's different ways of pronouncing words, different ways of spelling words, even though we're using the same base language. And that occurs today. It always occurred. And so, but what the Nokwe people, and I'm going to use the French, even because the French won't pronounce the T, so they'll say Nokwe, even though it looks like Noquette, like Baquette. No, it's Nokwe. And that's how it would have been pronounced, but that's pretty much is a resound of how they were saying it, Nokka, Nokke. And so that's how they were pronouncing their own band of people. And again, it was their band of people that were living here in the central Upper Peninsula, Algonquian, speaking people. Now, what they did was, although there is a little bit of controversy, were they one of the original groups? Even the oral history would tell you that they weren't part of the Anishinaabe migration, that they were a group of people that were here. But what happens is they assimilate into the Anishinaabe because they intermarry. They become best of friends. They speak the same language. They do everything. And pretty soon what happens is that it's like any place else. It's like even the bands, even the various clans were, even though they were separated into clans, they were pretty much the same people through marriages. Because you had to marry outside your clan. So you were actually all one people, even though you were a separate clan. And the same thing occurs too with the Nokwe. But eventually they become part of the Ojibwa people. And to this day, they're known as the Ojibwa people. And if you go back and you study the Madosh family and other of the early people that lived here in Marquette, they were Nokwe people, but they were Ojibwa people, but they belonged to the Nokwe band. And the Noka, and that's the other word that's used quite often, that's more of a native word, the Noka, they became members of Makwa, the Bear Clan. And so they are the Bear Clan, that would have been living here. So this is my best guess right now, and I'm almost done here. But my best guess is that the people who were living at Goose Lake at that particular period of time, 400 years ago, would have been the Nokwe. And the Nokwe lived all the way from Marquette Bay all the way to Bay de Noc. Bay de Noc was actually named after them. And that trail system that they draw in, it says trail from Marquette down to Bay de Noc. That was their trail. That's the trail that they used. They would from year to, and they would spend time here up on this end, and they would spend time down there, and depending upon the seasons and what they were doing. And of course, but there was people that would live specifically down there and up here, depending on their break apart of bands of the same clan. Okay. I know it makes a lot of sense to most people here, but to some people maybe it seems confusing. But that's who was here, and this is what I'm thinking now. Now I can change, and there might be something that's going to happen in my research, but I think it's this ancestral Bear Clan people, the Nokwe, who were Ojibwa, were the people that were living here. But this is one thing that we know for sure, regardless of what the clan was, the totem of the people that were here, living here at that particular time. This is a fact. These were ancestral Ojibwa people that were living there. And this is a family's winter home, okay? And I want you to think of this when you're trying to think of, of who these people were. Go back 400 years, go back 1,000 years, and you think, who are these people? If you want to know who they are, go look in the mirror. Because what they were no different than us. They were families. The people that lived here up at Goose Lake was a family just like yours. It was moms and dads, boys and girls, grandma and grandpa, probably uncles and aunts, a group of people that were trying to survive. And this is a great picture that we took on one of our summer fishing camps up on Silver Lake of our family as we gathered up there to spend days, a week up there fishing and stuff. And this is exactly, when I look at this picture, I'm thinking, yeah, that's pretty much what they would have looked like up there, out on Goose Lake. And so we can't separate ourselves from that fact. And a lot of times when we think of our history and we think of the past, we think of something different than the fact that these were people. These were people just like us. Moms and dads and boys and girls, sons and daughters, grandmas and grandpas and aunts and uncles. And that's who lived within these clans, within these bands, and made up the bigger tribes that belonged to the Anishinaabe, okay? Now, last thing I'm going to say is this, because this is something that I wrote from my heart, and it's a message I'm going to leave you with here. And it talks about why I do what I do. And before I do that, this is actually vodka. No, just kidding. No, it isn't. Okay, it's water. But I will have an old-fashioned when I get home. But anyway, here's what I wrote. See if I can read this small print on here. I should read it from there. So just what I'm going to do. If you will not share the knowledge of our past, do not search for it. For it is the greatest gift our ancestors can give to us. They will tell us the story of their lives if we put forth the effort to seek out their spirits, and if we strain to hear their faint voices. They will indeed whisper to us the stories of their past lives upon our Mother Earth. But only if we open our hearts and listen to them with our souls will we understand the muffled tones of their families' messages from so long ago. But it is also important to understand that these sacred gifts of knowledge must then be shared by those who are honored to now possess them. The greatest reward in my lifelong search for answers from my ancestors is that I do now get to share with others the stories that they have told me. Having something so precious to give to others is what fuels the fire in my heart to learn even more, to listen with all of my spirit for those ancient echoes of laughing children. It is what makes me laugh and smile. Jimmy Schmucko Paquette. Thank you. Miigwech. Just a couple other quick things here. A lot of people may wonder what happened. Where is this cultural material being stored right now? Well, a lot of it's still being studied. Okay, so it's bouncing around a little bit. But almost all of it is being professionally curated right here in Marquette, the Marquette Regional History Center, right where it came from to start with. In all of in all of the recovered materials. Well, first of all, I would say this: they have a professional curation area. It's one of the top ones in the state. It's in fact, it's one of only two that has heat controlled, temperature controlled curation. They got a full-time curator. So this stuff is just really under lock and key, and it's being stored. But it's also available for researchers, for people to study it and people to see it. And so what did I just do? So all of the recovered culture materials and site data, plus all of the notes and everything else, they will continue to be respectfully studied at the here and stored. Okay, so that's where this material is. I know people that may wonder that. Here's my sales pitch. Now, remember I told you, and I didn't come here to sell books. Okay, don't get me wrong here, but I just decided to throw this in there. But this is something that you should know. When I was originally going to talk to the elders here, I was actually going to talk about the site that you see there. It wasn't what I did tonight, but we've done so much more research, I decided to switch. And what I was going to talk about was what I did earlier in my life, as a native archaeologist, and that was when I was trying to find proof that we have always been here, that people have been living here in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan since the ice melted. And back when I started this, there was archaeologists that said, honestly, they said bullshit. They said no way. People weren't living here. It was too cold. I'm thinking, too cold. They live in Canada. But anyway, so I said, okay. But he said, well, nobody had ever found anything before. So I had set as my goal to go out and to find something and to say, okay, here's the proof. And it had to be obviously an artifact. And I didn't do any digging. It was just walking and searching and looking upon the surfaces, around here. And I was gifted. It was like incredible. This sounds the most stupid thing in the world, and I don't tell this to many people. I would have a vision of where something was before I even got there. And it happened twice on two of the most important archaeological discoveries. I knew it was there, and I saw it in my mind, and I went to that spot, and there it was. This was one of those sites. We called it the Gordo site. It was named after the guy that was with me at the time. People say, why didn't you call it the Piquette site? I said, well, that'd be kind of, obnoxious for me to do that. So, but anyway, I wrote a book about it, and the reason we actually did a professional. This site right here was a concentration of 10,000-year-old spear points. There's over 30 of them in one spot on Deer Lake up in Ishpeming, and we found them when the lake had drained. Okay, when it had mercury contamination back in 1987. Went out there. I told her that morning. We're coming back from Marquette. I said, I'm going to go to Deer Lake. I'm going to go find a Scotts Bluff spear point and prove it. And I actually said those words. And it's a specific one kind of 1,000 kinds of spear points that are out there. Guess what I went out there and found? And when we went to walk out to Gordo, and I told Gordo, I said, John, we got to go on the other side of that lake over there. I said, there's Scotts Bluff spear points laying over there. I said, I could see them. And he looked at me and said, yeah, right, you're nuts. We went over there, and there it was, But anyway, I wrote a book about it myself because we had written reports, but archaeological reports are written for professional archaeologists, for academics. And I thought that, no, we need to understand what we found there. We need to understand how it was found and what it represents to us. And so, and the other thing was, when we went there, on the day that we discovered it one day, we left everything laying there, came back the next day, and I got a hold of my dad, who was French Indian, and he's also was a very good, he's a professional photographer. And so I said, Dad, get every camera you got. I said, you're black and white, get your Ektachrome, because there was no digital cameras, okay? It's all 35 millimeter. And I said, we're going to take a picture, we're going to document this, we're going to get pictures of everything. I said, I want pictures of people taking pictures. And he actually took a picture of him taking pictures. Because we wanted to document everything and how important what this find was. Because it was the first discovery of what we call Paleo-Indian artifacts here in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. It was the first proof that people have been living here since the end of the Ice Age. And we were going to have to convince all of academia out there and all of the doubters that came from right here. And it was a result of that particular discovery. We found things that were 2,000 years older after that, okay? We found those things. This is the one that opened that door. It was a closed door, that nobody wanted to search. And I said, no, you're wrong. We're going to go find this. I know it. And something led me to it. And you can argue or guess as to what that may have been. But I decided to write this book to tell from a personal level to the general public and to all people out there what it was to make that discovery and why we did it. But the other thing I wanted to do was to use all of these photographs that my dad and I took, these National Geographic photos that no one would ever see. You know what I mean? Because they were slides, but I had them digitized later and then also had them printed. So I put these incredible photos into this book. And I wrote, the book it came out in 2004. And it came out, I did the book in memory of my little brother who died the year before. He's only 48 years old, and he had passed away from a heart attack. And so I wrote the book to honor him and also to honor my ancestors, all of my ancestors and my family. I brought along copies tonight if anybody wants them. Now, if you order this online, it's going to cost you $31.50, which to me is like way too expensive for this book. And so, but I brought along copies if anybody wants one. You're under no obligation to buy, because I'm not here to sell books, but I just brought them in case you wanted one. And I'm only selling for $20. So if you want a copy, Karen's got the books there. I know it sounds like I'm a band selling T-shirts at the end of the concert, but I do sound like that, don't I? They got these DVDs over here that whatever. I should never have done that, but anyway, I did. The last thing is, and remember this, when you look at like what I talked about tonight, and it's what I talked about our families, we are who we were. And today we are who we were. And that's why it's important to understand who your ancestors were. And you can go back in time as far back as you want, but try to understand more about who they were to find out who you are. And with that, miigwech. Thank you so much. Oh, I went